When I woke up from the accident, I thought I had survived, but the home I fought to return to had been legally taken. Like the video, subscribe to the channel because after losing everything, I'm not fighting to get my house back anymore. I'm fighting to make sure thousands don't lose theirs like I did. Daniel's arm trembled as he pushed open the familiar iron gate, but it didn't creak with rust like it always had. Instead, the first sound he heard after 2 months in the hospital was a stranger's voice yelling from inside the house. "Hey, you can't come in here!" Daniel froze, his hand still resting on the latch. He looked around in confusion. The house number still read 1473, Cypress Lane. The wooden fence he'd built himself was still standing. But inside, 2 men were carrying out his old sofa and loading it onto a moving truck. The same sofa he and his sister had eaten pizza on for a week straight because they couldn't afford a dining table. The same one with a broken backrest from the time he'd passed out on it after a 14-hour delivery shift. "Mate, this is my house," Daniel said, voice hoarse, limping forward with his right leg still in a cast. A tall man in a security vest stepped in his path. "You're not allowed in here. This property was foreclosed by the Pinebrook Hollow HOA. It's no longer yours." Daniel stood frozen. "What? No, that can't be. I just got out of the hospital yesterday. The HOA issued notice more than 6 weeks ago. You didn't respond, didn't pay the roof repair assessment. Under Clause 67B of the HOA bylaws, the property was deemed a structural risk to the community. It was sold 10 days ago." Daniel took a step back, his spine pressing against the gatepost like he needed it to hold him up. "I was in a car accident. I pulled a woman out of a wreck. I was in a coma for 17 days. No one called me. No one came to the hospital." The guard looked at him, eyes unmoved. "That's personal circumstance. We don't manage individual emergencies. If you have an issue, talk to a lawyer." Daniel looked toward the porch. Another man was dragging out his dining table. There was still a burn mark on it, a scar from a candle spill he once covered with a napkin. He shouted, "Stop, that's mine." But no one stopped. They didn't look at him like a homeowner. They looked at him like a trespasser. Daniel staggered back to the curb and collapsed onto the edge of the sidewalk, gasping. He fumbled for his wallet, pulled out his freshly printed hospital discharge note. It still said no heavy labor, avoid emotional distress. He laughed, a dry, broken sound, every breath like a punch to the ribs. A young family walked past. The wife glanced at him, then looked away. The husband muttered, "Probably some tenant who didn't pay." Daniel wanted to scream, "I wasn't renting. I owned that house. I made 5 years of payments. I fixed every shingle. I fought off floods. I paid insurance. I was going to paint that fence once I healed." But his mouth stayed shut, his fist clenched. A stitch on the back of his hand split and began to bleed. In his mind, the accident replayed in reverse. The flaming car, the woman screaming, his arms smashing the glass, dragging her out of the seat. He had thought then, maybe I won't survive this, but he did. Only to come home and find that everything he survived for had already been taken. And the worst part, they did it completely legally. Daniel didn't go home. There was no home to return to that night. He sat in his car, a beat-up Ford parked in a grocery store lot just a few blocks from his old house. The windows fogged up from his breath. His pillow was a hospital-issued coat he hadn't washed yet. In the trunk, everything he had left in the world fit inside a single backpack. Personal documents, hospital bills, and a photo of him with his sister taken back when they were renting a room together. His phone showed 42 unread emails, all from Pinebrook HOA automated system. Every single message was the same: overdue notices, violation alerts, foreclosure warnings. Not one message asked if he was still alive. No one knocked on the ICU door. No one called the phone number he left with the hospital front desk. Just a system hold automatic sending emails with bureaucratic precision, like software pretending to have a conscience. The final message confirmed the auction. His home was sold for $118,000. He had bought it for $137,000, which meant he didn't just lose the house. He lost money on something he never even got the chance to sell. He wanted to call his sister, but she had just given birth and her husband was out of work. He searched free legal help HOA eviction on Google, but most results led to intake forms and appointment scheduling pages. He tried the emergency legal hotline numbers but got nothing but voicemails. Eventually, Daniel walked back to the one place he still recognized, the hospital. He returned to the ICU wing where he'd once been unconscious, asking the night nurse to help pull up his records. That's when a student intern overheard his story. Her name was Ruby, a journalism major working on her senior thesis. When Daniel described how he'd come home only to watch strangers drag his life out the front door, she didn't ask for more details. She just pulled out her phone. "I have a friend at the local news station," she said. "I think they need to hear this." 2 days later, Daniel appeared on the evening news, still sitting in his car, holding his hospital papers, recounting what happened in a flat, rasping voice with dry, unblinking eyes. The story spread fast. The report was barely 2 minutes long, but it was shared tens of thousands of times. People weren't just angry about the house, they were angry about the reason. Saved a life, landed in the hospital, lost his home for not fixing a roof on time. One Twitter post read, "If this is legal, is anyone really safe in their own home anymore?" Meanwhile, at Pinebrook Hollow, HOA President Allison Stokes declined to comment. In an email to the news station, she wrote, "We followed protocol. Every homeowner is responsible for their property, regardless of personal circumstances." That response only fueled the outrage, but Daniel didn't post anything. He stayed in his car, sometimes glancing toward the house, now locked behind a gate with a sign that read, "Private property, no trespassing." He didn't know who bought it, he only knew this. They hadn't broken the law, and that somehow hurt the most. Because if right is defined by how fast an email is sent or how soon a payment is missed, then where does that leave a man with a broken leg, burned hands, and a spine full of scars earned saving someone's life? Where does someone like that ever belong in a system like this? 3 days after the news segment aired, Daniel received a message from an unknown number. "I lost my home because of this HOA too. If you need a witness, I've got proof." He thought it was a prank until the sender included a photo of a foreclosed house in Pinebrook from the previous year, along with a photocopy of the seizure notice, the reason moss accumulation on exterior walls for more than 30 days. The sender's name was Carl Jenkins, 51, a former supermarket security guard who lived alone. Carl said his house was seized after he suffered a stroke and was hospitalized. No one could reach him, so the HOA classified the property as abandoned and unmaintained. "It was sold at just 60% of market value. I didn't have the money to fight them," Carl wrote, "but I kept all the paperwork. If you want it, I'll hand it over." Daniel sat in a cafe reading the message, line by line, his fingers trembling, not from fear, but fury. Not for himself, but because he realized he wasn't an exception. He began digging deeper. Within one evening, he found at least 5 anonymous posts on the local forums, all claiming they'd been forced to sell by Pinebrook HOA for minor violations. Tree branches near power lines, a dented garage door, a mailbox that didn't match the HOA standard color. But what struck Daniel was the pattern. Every foreclosed property had belonged to someone alone, elderly, or without next of kin. There wasn't a single file involving a well-connected household. No one wealthy, no one on the HOA board. Daniel decided to act. He posted a simple message on the city forum. Just 3 lines, "I lost my house while I was in the hospital. If this happened to you too, reach out, I'm collecting cases." Within 48 hours, he received 19 messages. 8 came with attached documents. 3 people offered to testify in court if needed. One of them, Marjorie Delaney, age 74, shared how her 2-bedroom home had been seized for leaving the trash bin out past pickup time. When she tried to contest it, her claim was denied for lack of legal standing because the deed was still in her late husband's name. The deeper Daniel dug, the clearer it became. This wasn't clerical error. It was a strategy, a pattern of selective property seizure that preyed on human vulnerability. He printed everything, laid the documents out across poster boards, highlighted each case, annotated every name. Then he called Ruby, the journalism intern who'd first introduced him to the local station. "I have a bigger story," he told her. "This isn't just about me losing my house, it's about how this entire neighborhood is being stripped of homes." "One person at a time," Ruby paused, then answered. "You free tomorrow afternoon, I'll bring the camera. And this time we're not just telling a story. We're asking who's really buying all these homes." The next afternoon, Ruby showed up right on time, carrying a semi-pro camera, a lapel mic, and eyes that no longer belonged to just an intern. She set the camera on the hood of Daniel's car and asked a single question. "Where do you want to begin?" Daniel stood in front of his old house, hair still singed at the edges from the accident, his crutch leaning against his casted right leg. He took a long breath, then looked straight into the lens. "My name is Daniel Reyes. I used to own the house at 1473 Cypress Lane. I lost it while I was in recovery after pulling a woman out of a burning car." He paused, And the scariest part isn't losing the house, it's how they did it by the book. Legally, with no trace left for me to fight back, Ruby asked. Do you think someone's behind this? Daniel nodded yes. It's not just the HOA. It's about who's benefiting from homes sold at 40% below market value. She stared at him for a moment, then turned off the camera. Do you have the buyers' addresses? Daniel held up a thick stack of documents, printouts from public records. 11 of the 17 homes foreclosed in Pinebrook Hollow had been transferred to one of three companies: Horizon Resale LLC, Novastar Housing Solutions, and Clearwell Holdings. All three used P.O. Box addresses. No employees, no physical offices. Daniel and Ruby visited one of the listed locations. It was a shuttered laundromat. They searched online, no websites, just placeholder pages marked under construction. Ruby messaged her contact at the newsroom. This might be a mass-scale foreclosure acquisition scheme. If we verify it, we could expose a legalized cycle of property flipping. But just then, Daniel's phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Stop digging. Be grateful you're still alive. No name, no context. Just a warning, called to direct. Ruby frowned, but Daniel didn't back down. Good, he said. If someone's scared enough to send threats, it means we're getting close. At that moment, Ruby received an email from her friend at the city tax office. One of the companies, Clearwell Holdings, had just been awarded a contract for affordable housing renovations. A contract submitted by Pinebrook HOA directly to the city. No bidding process, no public notice. Daniel gripped the file in his hands. He turned to Ruby. This story isn't mine anymore. It belongs to everyone who's been quietly pushed out of their homes just because they weren't the right person at the right time with the right paperwork. As they drove away from the neighborhood, Daniel glanced back at the house that used to be his. The windows had been replaced. New curtains were drawn. A high-end SUV sat in the driveway. The new resident had moved in just a week earlier. A real estate agent, according to the security guard. Daniel didn't blame them. They didn't know. But he made a promise to himself: from now on, anyone who takes someone's home using cold paperwork would have to face the light and pay a price far greater than money. 3 days after Ruby's video was uploaded to YouTube, it started gaining traction. There were no flashy edits, no dramatic music, no clickbait title. Just Daniel standing on the patch of ground where his house once stood, telling his story in an even tone with eyes that asked for nothing. The video was 7 minutes long. By day 2, it had over 300,000 views. By day 5, a major news outlet reshared it with the headline, "They sold his home while he was still in the hospital." Now he's fighting back. The comments flooded in. I was threatened by my HOA for planting the wrong flowers. My grandma lost her house for parking in front of her own garage for 3 days. We thought HOAs were just nosy neighbors. Turns out it's an unchecked machine. Within a week, Daniel received over 50 messages from across the country. But one stood out: an email. No return address, sender name, EM, ex-board member. The message was brief. I used to sit on the Pinebrook HOA board. I know why they picked you, and I know who they're going after next, Ruby replied immediately. She arranged a meeting at a quiet cafe in the suburbs. Daniel sat across from the sender. A woman in her early 50s, silver hair glasses, dressed like a retired school teacher. Her name was Elaine Monroe, former unofficial secretary of the HOA board, who resigned the previous year because she couldn't take how things were done anymore. She slid a USB drive across the table. This has the closed-door meeting minutes from the past 8 months, including the one where your name came up. And something they call the priority enforcement list. Daniel frowned. I was picked ahead of time, she nodded. You were flagged as a financial vulnerability case, which meant if you didn't respond within 60 days, they could trigger a fast-track seizure. They use behavior analysis software, who lives alone, who's ever been late, who doesn't have legal counsel, and most importantly, who's most likely to stay quiet. Ruby froze. So this is a targeted system. Elaine gave a bitter smile. You're not wrong. They call it soft zoning, legal on paper, immoral in practice. Daniel looked at the USB, then at Ruby. Do we have enough? Ruby nodded, enough to blow up the whole system. But just then her phone buzzed. A message from her contact at the newsroom. Heads up, Pinebrook HOA just filed a takedown request for the video, claiming it defames the community and incites residents. Ruby looked up and exhaled slowly. They're scared now. Daniel clenched his fist. Then this is where we start fighting. 2 days later, Daniel and Ruby held a small gathering at a community library in the neighboring city. They didn't wait for the press. They didn't wait for city officials. They just sent out a simple invitation to everyone who had messaged Daniel. If you've ever lost your home, been threatened, or stayed silent because you thought you were alone, come that day, over 30 people showed up. The youngest was a 25-year-old single mother who lost her house after going into premature labor. The oldest was an 82-year-old man who'd been fined $300 by his HOA for failing to replace his American flag on the official holiday date. No one raised their voice, no one cried. But when Daniel stood and said, "We are not wrong because we're poor. We are not criminals for missing a payment. We've only lacked someone to stand with us until now," the room broke into its first applause. Ruby presented the structure of the forced sale system. Elaine Mae Monroe, the former HOA secretary, confirmed before the group. "I sat in the room where we selected 3 families listed as having the highest asset liquidation potential. And I walked out of that meeting feeling like an accomplice." The mood in the room shifted from outrage to action. A group of former real estate agents volunteered to review the legality of each foreclosure. A retired attorney offered to draft a petition to the district court. The group agreed if the authorities wouldn't act, they would open their own files and put everything in the public eye. The opportunity came sooner than expected. The next morning, Daniel's second video aired on a national morning news segment. This time, he didn't retell the story. He stood on the concrete slab where his home used to be, holding up letters one by one. Past due notice, violation warning, foreclosure order, and then he laid down a single sheet. Hospital discharge. Looking straight into the camera, he said, "I don't want pity. I want an answer for why this paper. My discharge meant less than a warning letter printed with cheap ink." The video went viral, reaching number 2 on YouTube, trending in under 24 hours. That was when the Pinebrook HOA finally released its first official statement. It read in part, "We are the victims of an emotional media campaign that distorts the facts. The HOA has done nothing but enforce rules that residents themselves voted into existence." Ruby laughed when she read that line. Do they really think people today are that easy to fool? But Daniel didn't laugh. "No," he said, "they're not counting on ignorance, they're counting on exhaustion, because they know we get angry for a moment and then stay silent for life." He looked over at the stack of legal filings being prepared. "Not this time. This time we don't stop after one article or one video." Then he picked up the pen and signed. The lawsuit was filed with the Travis County District Court on Monday morning. The lead plaintiff, Daniel Reyes, but attached to the case were more than 20 co-plaintiffs, all of whom had lost their homes, been fined, or pushed out of Pinebrook or nearby neighborhoods for reasons Daniel called paper clean, real-world cruel. Representing them was attorney Marcia Dell, a former state assistant prosecutor known for overturning a major agricultural land seizure case. "This isn't a lawsuit about feelings," she said at the first press conference. "It's about a system operating like a house harvesting machine, shuffling property into the hands of investment groups under the guise of community compliance." The media turnout was larger than expected, from local news to CNN, from legal blogs to TikTok live streams. Ruby held the mic with trembling hands, her first time in front of a media swarm, but Daniel stood firm, voice steady. "No notes needed. I'm not against HOAs. I'm against abuse of power. I'm against losing my home, not because of disaster, not because of debt, but because I didn't respond to an email while I was in a coma." After the press event, the public response hit like a storm. A retired Army officer tweeted, "If it happened to him, what's stopping it from happening to us?" A group from another state posted a video describing how their HOA seized their porch over non-uniform paint color. On Reddit, the subreddit r/HOA horror stories grew by over 100,000 members in just 3 days. And then for the first time, a current member of the Pinebrook HOA Oversight Board spoke out publicly, but not to defend the organization. His name was Greg Huntley, who was formerly the internal finance chair. In a 4-minute video, he said bluntly, "We were instructed to raise minimum fines to generate predictable revenue. When I asked predictable for whom, I was removed from the audit committee." Greg confirmed that Pinebrook HOA's model was built on engineered violations for enforcement. They didn't wait for infractions, they created them. Examples: quietly changing house color rules via email during a holiday weekend, then finding homeowners who didn't repaint within 30 days, or sending notices to outdated addresses, knowing the homeowner was temporarily away, just to trigger the non-response protocol. Daniel listened to that video while eating cup noodles in his car. He didn't say anything, just looked outside at the row of homes, all perfectly painted, same roofs, same doors, all HOA-approved colors. But no one knew how many people had been quietly forced out to keep that perfection error-free. Then his phone buzzed. A new message from the woman he saved in the accident. Linda Parson, 47, accountant, single mother. It read, "You saved my life. Now it's my turn to help you keep your home." Topped attached was a set of internal financial documents. Her old employer, the same company that bought Daniel's house. She had a copy of their reimbursement sheet. It included a line item labeled HOA facilitation expense. Daniel froze, staring at the screen, then turned to Ruby. "We have a living witness and a copy of the contract." Ruby didn't say a word. She just smiled, hit record on her camera, and whispered, "Let's roll, the real game starts now." 3 days after Linda Parson came forward, Daniel's legal team filed a motion to open a criminal investigation into Pine Brook HOA and the 3 associated companies. The evidence submitted wasn't just Linda's financial report. It included a recorded online meeting between the HOA board and representatives from the investment firms. In the audio, a male voice identified as Stuart Blaine, CEO of Horizon Resale LLC, spoke plainly. "We need at least 5 more units this quarter. Focus on the low legal resistance group, singles, the sick. New residents, immigrants, push them out as soon as possible." No one in the meeting objected. Not a single no. Just the sound of fingers tapping, quiet laughter, and one final chilling line. "Move fast before the media catches wind." The recording aired exclusively on the local news during prime time. That night, national media picked up the story. The next morning, the Washington Post headline read, "The perfect neighborhood built on targeting the weakest." A provisional committee from the State Attorney General's office was formed, freezing the assets of all companies involved, pending an investigation into acquisition practices. Within 24 hours, 2 of the 3 firms' websites went offline for maintenance. But everyone knew they were running. By now, Daniel was no longer just a man trying to reclaim his home. He had become the face of a national reckoning with the HOA system. People who had once stayed silent began posting videos telling their own stories. A veteran fined for flying the flag upside down on Independence Day. A widow who lost her home because ivy grew past her fence line. A student evicted after the homeowner died, even though he lived there legally. They all had one thing in common: no one stood up for them, and they had all believed it was their fault. The night before the first state-level hearing, Daniel received a call from a blocked number. He hesitated, then answered. A man's voice came through cold. "Precise. You still have time to back out. If you don't, we'll pull your tax records, your debt history, even that credit check from 6 years ago. You think you're a hero. Remember, heroes go bankrupt too." Daniel didn't respond. He simply hit record, capturing every word, then hung up. He forwarded the file to his lawyer, not to press charges, but to keep it as proof of something more important. Threats don't come when you're wrong. They come when you start doing what's right. The next day at the hearing, Daniel walked into the chamber with Ruby attorney Marcia Dell and 2 other former homeowners. No one wore tailored suits. No one carried signs. But one object sat at the center of their table, a weathered wooden board, the last remaining piece of Daniel's former home. On it, painted in white letters, were the words, "I lost my home, saving someone's life. No one else should lose theirs because they stayed silent." Then Daniel gave his first testimony, not from notes, not with hesitation. He spoke in a voice still rough from smoke and a heart still burning for justice. The hearing lasted 6 hours. It was broadcast live, over 2 million views within the first 24 hours. Daniel sat in the center of the Texas State Capitol hearing room with attorney Marcia Dell behind him and Ruby to his right, tracking social media reactions in real time on her laptop. He hadn't eaten lunch, just water, waiting for his turn. When his name rang out over the microphone, Mr. Daniel Reyes, resident of Pine Brook Hollow, plaintiff in the HOA property seizure case, the room fell completely silent. Not a pen tap, not a cough. Daniel stepped forward, placing the old wooden board in front of him. He didn't look at the papers, didn't glance at the cameras. He only looked at the committee. "I don't have a law degree. I didn't read every HOA bylaw when I signed. I didn't know how to sue someone until I lost my home. But I know what it feels like to wake up after an accident, leg in a cast, wires stuck to your chest, and come back to find strangers loading your couch into a moving truck." The chamber held its breath. Daniel spoke of every warning letter, every night he slept in his car, Every time he almost called his sister, but it didn't, because she was raising a newborn and he didn't want to add to her worry. I thought I was a glitch in the system. Turns out I was a target by design. He lifted the board. I kept this, not to remember where I lived, but because without it, I'd have nothing left to prove I ever had the right to exist in the place I paid to call home. After his testimony, a committee member, State Representative Joanna Singh, asked a question. Mr. Reyes, if the court ruled tomorrow that your house would be returned to you, would you go back? Daniel paused, then said quietly, I don't need my house back. I need to know the next person won't be a single mom, a veteran, or someone like me just because they didn't respond to an email while they were hospitalized. The hearing ended with a round of applause longer than protocol usually allowed, but no one stopped it. And when Daniel exited the chamber, the crowd outside had split into two groups. One cheered, holding signs, "Homes have hearts, not just rules." The other shouted, "Law is law. He's just blaming the system." A man in a gray suit stepped toward Daniel with a mic from a conservative news outlet. "Do you think you're a hero or just someone stirring chaos against structured living?" Daniel looked at him and smiled, just barely. "I think I'm the first one not bowing my head." That quote was clipped, shared, and labeled America's #1 HOA enemy. On some forums, people began digging up old photos of Daniel, unpaid tuition bills, graveyard delivery shifts, even a rejected credit score report from when he was 24. One anonymous account launched a thread, "Why emotion shouldn't dictate housing law." Daniel realized this time they weren't just attacking his actions. They were going after his past, but he didn't flinch. Because for the first time in months that night, when he returned to the small apartment the community had helped rent for him, there was a piece of paper taped to the door. Not a notice, not a fine, just a scribbled, handwritten note. "Saw you on TV. My house was taken in 2019. I thought I was alone. Now I know I'm not. Thank you." 4 days after the public hearing, the tide on social media began to turn. A heavily edited clip of Daniel's testimony went viral, featuring him saying, "I don't need my house back," while the following sentence, "I need to know the next person doesn't lose theirs, like I did," was deliberately cut. The video was titled, "Man Gets Free Support, Still Complains, Wants to Take Down HOAs." In just 24 hours, it racked up over 100,000 comments, half of which were hostile, ungrateful leech. So saving someone means you get to break laws. He thinks being injured makes him special. Daniel didn't respond to a single post, but Ruby didn't stay quiet. She tweeted, "No one breaks the law by selling someone's home while they're in a coma. Editing videos doesn't change facts." Her tweet was shared over 50,000 times, picked up by multiple national journalists. Still, the smear campaign snowballed. A new website launched, HOA Facts, claiming to be a misinformation correction hub for community associations. It featured a dedicated page titled, "The Daniel Reyes File," listing poor credit history, failed scholarship taxes, late vehicle registration, all pulled from public records, technically legal but completely irrelevant to the house seizure. The damage was psychological. Daniel's image shifted from victim to irresponsible man seeking special treatment. Marcus, a seasoned civil rights activist and longtime friend of Ruby, called Daniel in. "They're using the oldest tactic in the book, personalizing the fear. If they make people think you are just a messy exception, they'll stop feeling complicit." Daniel was quiet. "I'm not good at media," he said. "I just wanted to live peacefully, keep my home, hold on to something decent." Marcus answered without hesitation, "Decency can't survive if silence keeps getting legal protection." Right then, Ruby rushed into the meeting room, phone raised. State court just approved a full internal investigation into all HOA foreclosures at Pinebrook over the past 5 years and subpoenaed the current HOA president. The room went still. No one expected the response to be that fast. Ruby turned to Daniel. "You're the first person to make the system answer a question rather than pin blame on the powerless." But before they could celebrate, an anonymous email was sent to Daniel's legal counsel. The message read, "You need to understand the system has a public face and a private grip. You're touching something no one has ever been allowed to touch." Attached was a scanned copy of Daniel's current lease agreement and a photo of him standing outside his apartment. Ruby turned pale. "They're watching you." Daniel wasn't surprised. He simply slid the unfinished case files across the table to the lawyer. "If I disappear, don't stop, and if anyone asks why I didn't stay quiet like others did, Tell them it's because I once lived in a home and I know what it feels like to have it taken without a single person asking if I was okay. 1 week after the investigation order was approved, Pinebrook HOA held a surprise press conference. No major networks were invited, only a handful of friendly outlets. It was deliberately scheduled to overlap with Daniel's second state hearing. Ruby smelled a distraction. She and Daniel quietly sent in a volunteer student with a hidden camera. The conference took place in a luxury meeting room on the ground floor of a 4-star hotel. The speaker, Camilla Brooks, the newly appointed HOA president, following Allison Stokes' sudden resignation for personal reasons. Camilla read from a prepared statement insisting that Pinebrook HOA has never violated foreclosure law and describing critics as a small emotional faction disrupting an otherwise model residential community. When asked about transactions involving the 3 now investigated investment firms, she gave a single response: "That falls under the purview of private civil entities, not my executive responsibility." The conference wrapped up quickly, but that very afternoon an internal document leaked. It was a memo from former President Stokes sent to the entire HOA board a year prior. It read, "Next quarter's goal: optimize cash flow by liquidating non-contributive properties. Priority to households with low legal response, probability, signed and stamped." An attached file listed names of flagged households. One stood out: Reyes Daniel, high financial risk, lives alone, no legal representation. Ruby froze reading it. She turned to Daniel. "They didn't just list you, they profiled you like an intelligence agency with no warrant." Just then Daniel's phone rang. The caller ID stunned him. Stuart Blaine, CEO of Horizon Resale LLC, the firm that bought his home. His voice was rough, cold, but steady. "You're disrupting the market," Blaine said. "This isn't about your house anymore. This is the financial operations model of an entire real estate generation. If you break this system, hundreds of companies fall." Daniel answered calmly, "I've lost everything. Once I'm not afraid of collapse anymore." Blaine gave a dry laugh. "You've got it backward. You're not dangerous because you've got nothing to lose. You're dangerous because you make others remember they had something to lose too." The call ended. Daniel had recorded the entire thing. He sent it to his attorney not to sue, but to include in the public record. That same day, a crack opened from inside the very system they were fighting. Edward Fan, interim audit accountant for Pinebrook HOA, released a public email to the press. "I refuse to sign a financial statement I know to be false. I discovered over $120,000 transferred from HOA accounts to satellite companies, most with no attached invoices. I am ready to testify." Less than 24 hours later, the Texas Real Estate Oversight Commission issued an emergency order suspending Pinebrook HOA's operations and appointing a neutral committee to temporarily manage the community. Daniel read the news in silence. Ruby cried. "We did it," she whispered. But Daniel didn't nod. "Not yet," he said. "Not while people who lost their homes are still sleeping in cars." Then he stood up. "Now it's time to get those homes back, not just mine. All of them." 1 week after Pinebrook HOA was suspended, Daniel received an offer he hadn't expected. From Horizon Resale LLC, the very company that bought his house after the HOA seized it. In an email barely 10 sentences long, they stated that in the interest of closing this dispute and maintaining a positive public image, they were prepared to transfer ownership of 1473 Cypress Lane back to Daniel. No lawsuit, no conditions, no apology, no admission of wrongdoing. Just a quiet way to clear the media path. At the same time reports began circulating, other HOAs across the state were taking notes, quietly wiping certain fines, delaying scheduled foreclosures. A Texas lawmaker introduced the Reyes Act, proposing that any residential seizure must have a court ruling and that all residents must be granted legal representation. By default, Daniel's story had moved beyond Pinebrook, but the house where it all began was on its way back to him. Ruby exhaled with relief. Attorney Marcia Dell allowed herself a rare smile. "Looks like justice found its shape," she said. But Daniel sat in his car for hours. No replies, no return calls. Then he drove to Cypress Lane, parked in front of the old gate. The house still stood. The roof was new. Fresh curtains, the lavender plants he once grew had been replaced with polished, white stones. Everything looked perfect, but it no longer felt like his. Not because the name wasn't on the deed yet, but because he knew now this place had become a symbol, and symbols don't belong to just one person anymore. The next morning, Daniel called a brief press conference. Reporters swarmed in, expecting a triumphant announcement, a full-circle homecoming. But Daniel stepped forward and placed the transfer document on the table. "I'm grateful for the opportunity to reclaim the house that was once mine," he began. "But today I'm offering it not for myself, but for anyone who has ever lost their home in silence." He paused, looked up. "I propose that 1473 Cypress Lane be converted into a statewide legal aid and temporary housing center for HOA-related victims." The crowd froze for a beat, then applause erupted. Ruby turned away, wiping her eyes. Marcia gripped Daniel's hand. "You gave up a house to protect the ones still at risk." Daniel nodded. "I don't need a place to stay anymore. I need a place where others can start again." 1 month later, the house was renovated. The ground floor became a legal counseling office. Upstairs housed 2 temporary bedrooms. The backyard became a shared community garden. And on the front door, a bronze plaque was installed. No owner's name, no donor's signature, just one line. "This is for the ones who thought they had no choice." That November winter came early. The trees lining Pinebrook shed golden leaves in thick layers, covering the cracks in the pavement, as if trying to erase the memory of a battle once fought there. But in the minds of its residents, no one forgot the name Daniel Reyes, not as a HOA whistleblower, but as the first person who made them reflect on all the things they had silently accepted. The house at 1473 Cypress Lane officially reopened on December 1st under a new name, The Front Step. Not a center, not a legal institute. Just a simple name enough to remind people that everyone deserves a step to stand on and a place to begin again. On opening day, over 200 people came. No speeches, no ribbon cutting. They sat together eating cookies. Ruby had brought drinking pre-brewed coffee and quietly looking at one another like people who had each walked through the same kind of darkness. Daniel didn't speak. He stood at the back of the crowd, hands in his jacket pockets, just watching. When a woman walked in with 2 small children and said, "I got an HOA eviction notice for building a play area for my kids," he turned away not out of sadness, but because he knew this was why he had refused to take the house back. At the same time, the Texas state government announced a sweeping package of HOA reforms. Mandatory financial transparency, guaranteed appeal windows for resident fines, and limits on home seizures without a court ruling. Lawmakers called it the Reyes effect. Daniel gave no comment to the press. He declined all national TV interviews and motivational speaking invitations. When a famous talk show host messaged him, "You could be the voice for millions of silenced homeowners," Daniel replied simply, "I don't want to be a figure, I just don't want anyone else to become me." But it couldn't be helped. His photo appeared on magazine covers beneath the headline, "The Man Who Gave Up His House So Others Might Keep Their." Ruby moved into a place near the front step, taking on the role of outreach and communications director. Marcia launched a free online course on civil housing rights, using Daniel's case as the core study. And Daniel, he took a part-time job as a roof technician with a small repair company in Austin. He didn't tell anyone, but this time he wanted to help people protect their roofs before they ever had to fight for them in court. At night after work, he often stopped by the front step, sat on the porch, held a coffee cup, watched the gate. Whenever someone new walked in, he was always the first to rise and open the door. No questions, no names, because he understood no one comes to a repurposed old house in the middle of winter unless they're looking for something stronger than shelter. They're looking for proof they haven't been left behind. 2 months after the front step opened its doors, an independent report from a citizen oversight organization was released. In the past 5 years alone, over 3,200 home foreclosures in Texas had been executed by HOAs without court rulings. 62% of those affected were from vulnerable populations, elderly, individuals living alone, low-income households, immigrants, or residents with serious medical conditions. The report was a shock, not just for the numbers, but because every target came with a name. It was the first time the state had to face the manufactured perfection of neighborhoods run by cold bylaws and automated penalties. One lawmaker called it order built on silence. The Reyes Act was no longer just a proposal. It became a warning from within the system itself. The legislation required HOAs to include independent resident representatives outside of the executive board, mandated quarterly public financial disclosures, and enforced that all foreclosure decisions undergo 2 independent review phases. But the final clause caught everyone off guard. Absolute prohibition on the seizure of residential property from individuals undergoing medical treatment, temporary incapacity, or verifiable humanitarian crisis. On paper, it sounded simple. In practice, it marked the end of a model built on preying upon those least able to fight back. Daniel wasn't present at the vote. He was fixing the front porch roof for an elderly woman in South Austin. Someone once threatened by her HOA for installing outdoor lights not matching neighborhood design standards. When she heard the bill pass, she simply took Daniel's hand and said, "Now no one can throw you out of your home just because you were too weak to answer a letter." Daniel smiled. He didn't need anything more. That evening, when he returned to the front step, Ruby handed him a package. Inside was a handwritten letter signed Valerie Granger, former president of the Pine Brook HOA. She was now living in Arizona away from media attention. There was no apology in the letter, but she wrote, "I understand now why I failed. I used to think preserving order meant keeping everything quiet, but order doesn't come from law. It comes from how we treat those who can't protect themselves." At the end, she included an old photograph. Pine Brook, summer 2005. She stood at the gate of her home, smiling widely, holding her young daughter, just a resident, no power, no title. Daniel went quiet. He recognized that feeling once having a home and believing it would last forever. But power makes people forget the simplest truth. A home is not something to manage, it's something to protect. Ruby asked, "What will you do with the photo?" Daniel replied, "Hang it in the hallway at the front step, so people remember even those who once abused power can still come to understand." Then he picked up a hammer and hung the picture right beside the photo of James, a young boy who once lost his home because his parents were wrongfully fined by an HOA. Now he was home again, not in law, but in the memory of a community that knew how to forgive and never forgot. One rainy Friday afternoon, wind whipped through the neighborhood and sent a few papers flying from the front door of the front step. A boy, about 13, appeared and knocked. He wore a coat 2 sizes too big and carried a heavy backpack. "Are you Mr. Reyes?" he asked. Daniel nodded. The boy set his backpack down, unzipped it, and pulled out a bundle of papers tied with twine. "My dad told me to bring this here," he said. "He doesn't have the guts to come back to Pine Brook, the place where he used to live. But he said if someone like you had the courage to speak up, the least he could do was let the truth be told." Daniel sat down and quietly untied the bundle. Inside a 2018 foreclosure contract, a canceled insurance notice, termination after one missed payment, and a handwritten letter never sent. It had been written from a hospital bed. "I'm going through chemo. I don't have internet to reply to emails. If someone reads this, please hold my house. I'll come back when I'm better." The letter never made it. The house was sold. The man never returned. But today, his son had brought the truth back. Daniel didn't say a word. He simply rested his hand on the cover of the folder, his eyes drifting toward the end of the hallway where volunteers were repainting windows and rearranging chairs. Each of them had a story. Someone who lost their home. Someone who once issued fines out of fear of losing their own position. Someone who had stayed silent too long. None of them were perfect, but now together they were rebuilding a space where imperfection was met with dignity, not punishment for not fitting a mold. That evening, Daniel took a walk through the old Pine Brook neighborhood. No more HOA signs, no more hidden cameras. Residents had started painting their own house numbers, putting up handmade community boards and holding backyard meetings. An old man was fixing a fence that had been torn down the year before. When he saw Daniel, he waved. Back to visit the old place, Daniel smiled and nodded. "Not to take anything back," he said, "just to see. If people still feel like this is home." The man squinted, then chuckled. "Feels like it now. No one's threatened to fine me for letting wild daisies grow off schedule anymore." He pointed across the street to a weathered house, now covered in fresh paint. The kids pooled money to buy paint for the lady next door. Nobody asked them to, they just did it. Daniel stood and watched. The rain had started to fall again, but no one rushed inside. He realized then the biggest thing he'd done wasn't winning a lawsuit. It wasn't exposing a system. It was helping people remember that a community could be rebuilt, but only when people believed each other were real, not problems to be monitored. On his way back, Daniel got a text from Ruby. "Someone special wants to meet you tomorrow. You should stay at the front step." He replied with one word, "Ready?" One in time. The next morning when Daniel arrived at the front step, Ruby was already waiting outside with 2 cups of hot coffee. She pointed to the wooden bench on the porch. "Sit there," she said. "The special guest is on the way." He frowned. Reporter Ruby shook her head. No legislator. Not that either. A few minutes later, an old gray-blue SUV pulled up at the gate. A woman stepped out, mid-50s, silvered coat, carrying a small wooden box. She walked slowly toward him and stopped in front of Daniel. "I'm Linda," she said. "The woman you pulled from the burning car that day." Daniel froze. For the first time since waking up in the hospital. He saw the face of the person he'd saved. Not on a screen, not through headlines. In real life, Linda placed the wooden box on the porch table and opened it. Inside was a photo frame, Daniel lying unconscious on a stretcher, clutching a bouquet. The firelight behind him blurred. "My daughter took this by accident," she said. "From a distance right after it happened. We always meant to find you," she continued. "But when we heard what happened to your home, we felt too small to show up." Daniel said nothing. Not from emotion, but because he didn't know what words could possibly fit. Linda went on, "I don't have money to repay a life. But my daughter said if the man who saved us lost his home, then the least we could do was help him build something that makes sure no one else has to." She handed him a check. It wasn't large. $3,000 made out to the front step, legal support fund. Daniel didn't take the check. He stood and gently wrapped his arms around her. Not to accept gratitude, not to repay debt, but because two people, one who had once saved and one who had once been saved, were now standing face to face, not to close a chapter, but to start something better, something bigger. After Linda left, Daniel turned to Ruby. He lifted the framed photo and hung it beside the front door. Beneath it, he wrote a single line. "This is where the right things can begin, even if they once came too late." That evening, as the city lit up, the front step stayed glowing. Not with spotlight, but with kitchen light, desk lamps, hallway bulbs. Each small room glowed with warm gold, sending a quiet message to anyone passing by. If you have ever lost something, ever stayed silent, ever believed you had no choice, there's still a place keeping its door open. Not to ask where you've been, but to remind you that you still matter. Even if no one ever wrote your name into the bylaws. And Daniel, he still sat on the front step every night, not waiting, just to make sure that if someone ever needed to be welcomed, no one would be left behind again. Thank you for staying with us until the very end of this story. If you believe that everyone deserves a home, not just made of bricks, but built on respect, please hit like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story. Share this video with your friends and loved ones, because sometimes one story is enough to move an entire world.